Uh,
Hello, and welcome to the Asset Leadership Network Asset Leadership Forum 2020 Restructuring America. I'm Nick Kanoki, the producer and director of technology for the Asset Leadership Network. And today we'll be talking about government assets reconsidered. I would like to introduce Bob Kaler, ALN board member and CGI federal senior consultant. And one more note before we get started here. If you guys who are watching have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. Other than that, let's get things started. Bob?
Why, thank you, Nick, and good morning to everybody on the call, wherever you may be. I think we've got a coast-to-coast audience, and in fact, it might even be international. And thank you all for attending for the session today, where we are going to really focus on government property and talking about government assets reconsidered. We have a great roster of speakers to bring incredible information to you, so thank you all for attending. As for myself, yes, I have been with the ALN since the beginning of the ALN, currently serving on the board and as board treasurer. I am also involved in the National Property Management Association, which is an industry group dedicated to personal property around the government assets. I serve as the vice president of finance there, and I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with the National Property Management Association, visit npma.org to understand a little bit about the perspective that NPMA brings to the asset management function, and in fact, working towards improving asset management across organizations throughout the federal government, federal contractors, universities, state and local governments. As Nick said, we've got a great session today about government assets reconsidered, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our three speakers today. First up is going to be Amber Probert. Amber has been involved in assets around the DoD for as long as I can remember, and she must have started when she was 12 years old. Because she has been involved in all aspects of government property, currently serving as a property accountability specialist in the U.S. Department of Defense. I'll let Amber introduce herself more fully, but with that, Amber, let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. First, I want to say thank you to the Asset Leadership Network. It's always great to come back and to talk with all of the people that I have met through the ALN and also through the NPMA. The NPMA is one of the reasons that I am so familiar with all of these fine people that you are listening to today. So I want to second Bob's plug to go to npma.org. You're going to get some quality knowledge from that group. So today, I'll start off by just explaining what I do in the Department of Defense. I'm part of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and I am with the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Logistics. My role now is to coordinate all of the audit issues that are facing the logistics branch of the Department of Defense. This entails a lot of just learning all of the lingo, working with a bunch of different communities. Sometimes it's acquisition related, but it flows into logistics. Sometimes it's a logistics related issue that flows into finance. Sometimes it's all the different groups mixed together. So it's a lot of planning, a lot of organization, and a lot of working with all of the different pieces of the department to try to get to resolutions and more improved business processes. So how does this tie into our restructuring our assets? Well, for me, it is enterprise risk management. We are trying to develop a way to take all of our issues, whether it's an audit related issue that has been independently verified, or an inspector general issue, a GAO issue, maybe it's a critical operations kind of issue. But we need to be able to take all of these different aspects of our business, look at them holistically, and then try to balance our resources against the criticality of what's going on. That is not easy, but we're beginning that journey. So how are we going about this? The first thing that we're doing is assembling as many experts as we can possibly assemble. We need all the different backgrounds to participate, and each of them brings not only the skill set, but just their knowledge about the intricacies of all the different things that they manage. And, you know, assets is just one of those critical things that flows through everything, be it people with their resources, people with their knowledge, be it things, it all ties together. So we start with our people and our people resources to bring them together and look at what are the major issues that we're facing right now. COVID is one of those major issues that we're facing right now. We need to understand what testing equipment we have, where it is. We need to understand who has access to it. Is it being utilized? Can it be utilized? And that's one of those issues that we're really trying to address through just a holistic look at the department. Along with that, we're looking at other goals like establishing our financial reporting requirements. That's not as vitally important as addressing COVID due to just how the far-reaching impacts, but in its own way, we have that very high level of importance, and we need to be able to address this. So how do you balance your resources, your money, your people with a critical issue like dealing with COVID and other really important issues like, you know, managing your assets appropriately, improving your business operations, and building the trust that we are doing the best possible job that we can do with what we have. It's a big challenge. Thankfully, there are tools out there, software-based tools. We're starting to pilot different software-based enterprise risk management tools to look at the pros and cons and how we can marry our issues with our work and our resourcing. So we're trying to strategically plan how we're going to get our arms around all these sorts of things. One of the best features that I've seen has been the risk profile. You can build a risk profile around an issue, and you can build that profile using many different aspects. You can use manpower required. You can use operational impacts. You can use cost. How costly would it be to fix this problem? And those are just some of the different aspects that you can use to try to build a risk profile on the issues that you're trying to work. In conjunction with the risk profile, we're also looking at how do the different issues fit together. Is there a big problem that will take care of several little problems? what are the root causes? So the root causes are another aspect that we're really trying to drive toward. People can identify symptoms really easily. It's figuring out what's actually causing the symptoms. So that's another aspect of the enterprise risk management approach that we're trying to apply in the DoD. It's going to take a lot of effort. We're working in conjunction with the military services. Each of the services are trying to do their own ERM applications. So they're looking internally to just their issues. At my level, we're taking both the work that they're doing for their internal issues and putting it together in a global picture. So we're looking department-wide. Sometimes there's a particular item that impacts multiple services or the other components. And from our seat, that's where we can influence how the resourcing gets applied, how to prioritize what's going to get fixed, what gets the attention. And a lot of it is top cover too. Sometimes having that leadership position that shows, okay, we've seen all these different aspects based on our data available. We're recommending you prioritize issues 1, 2, and 3. Then when other elements of the department come and ask why issues 4, 5, and 6 are slow in being fixed, we provide the top cover to say, based on our criticality, based on our risk profile, we're working on 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6 will be in the next wave. So all of that put together is just an overview of how we are looking at using our resources more effectively, trying to address all of the issues around our assets, our asset management, and looking at it as an enterprise instead of issue by issue. Were there any questions, Bob?
Why, thank you. That was I do have a question, and it's particularly around standards. And I know that we've looked at, there's some standards around risk management, and standards are important as you're looking at this. I'm familiar with a standard that was put out by the ASTM having to do with risk management. And my question really is, at what level are you looking at standards and bringing standards into the process of going through and deciding how you're going to apply risk management policies and strategies?
That's a great question. We are very early in trying to implement the ERM as a department. So standards right now are very critical to me because it gives me a framework that I can use to make sure that I'm not missing a aspect that's that's a common knowledge based on the standards. So it's really helping to inform how I can help address ERM as the department.
And then just a follow-up question on that. Is the DoD, or let me, there's not is, but how is the DoD looking at the asset management standard, the ISO 55000 standard, and integrating that into what you're doing and across the department in general, if you have that information?
Well, right now, the ISO 55000 is helping to build the framework. We're not at a point where we might consider pursuing certification against the 55,000 standards, but it's a healthy framework to use to make sure that as we're addressing all of the different ERM aspects, that it brings in the other elements that we may not have immediately considered.
Very good. yeah, standards are an exciting opportunity, I think, for a lot of people in asset management, as it is now getting towards a tipping point. So is there any possibility of requiring SAMPs from contractors, or strategic asset management plans, as they're known, from contractors?
That's too far down the road for me to predict, and it's definitely a different branch. I don't have a lot to say in what goes into the requirements that go out to contractors.
Nick, or as producer, are there any questions that are coming up?
Yeah, Marty Rowland has asked, 2 decades ago, resource managers talked about bandwidth management to describe the task of setting individual boundaries for multiple factors so that they together produce an outcome that is desired. Is this a good way to describe what you're doing, Amber?
In a way, we're trying to apply prioritization within the constraints of what we have. So it sounds very similar to bandwidth management.
Great. And there was one other question from Cecilia Mowat. Appreciate your strategic approach, Amber. What tools of communication are you using to make the process transparent and set the expectations? In looking at 55,001 5.3 for involving all stakeholders, how are you identifying stakeholders?
Well, first, we're bringing in all of the action officer level people from all of the different components throughout the department. So we have representation from both each component, and within each component, we're looking for representatives from logistics, from contracting, from finance, from program management, systems. So that way, as we build our risk register and our profiles, we have input from all the vested bodies within each component, and each component has their own representation.
Awesome. Well, that's that's all the questions I see in the Q&A currently.
Any other panelists have a question that they want to raise? Well, Amber, let me ask this question then. I know that risk management has been a strategic initiative in many commercial organizations, and they put a lot of effort into managing their risk across the organization. And I'm wondering, what are the similarities, and more importantly, maybe what are the differences in how DoD is going to look at risk management versus what they're doing in the commercial world?
Thanks. That can be a challenging question, Bob. Yeah, part of it is the constraints that a government agency has that a commercial agency does not have. When we look at our budgets, if we haven't structured our budget in a way that supports the risk management profile, then we have to go back to Congress, or we have to go to the comptroller to get reprogramming done to make sure that we've applied funding where we need to apply the funding. Sometimes there's chain of command issues. You get into the lower levels of the components, and everything's going fine, They get to their leadership, and their leadership doesn't see the picture the same way that everybody else sees the picture. There's a new roadblock, and I don't know that there's a huge correlation with the commercial side of things, but I know in the DoD especially, you get to the military side of things, and they get some hackles raised pretty easily sometimes. So I think that those would be a couple of examples where we would have different challenges in approaching enterprise risk management compared to commercial side.
Okay, I have a question or chat that just came in, and this is from Boyd Beal. It says, I believe we need to put risk in its proper perspective with respect to value to the organization and cost. Some risks are worth taking, and this should be applied to all projects. Do you agree?
Oh, yes. Well, that's part of what we're trying to do. We need to understand better about why something is a critical issue so that we can accept risk where risk needs to be accepted. If we don't understand why an issue is a critical issue, then we may not accept the risk, whereas had we had a better understanding of what that issue was, then we would have accepted the risk and continued to work towards a resolution.
Yes, good. I mean, that leads to the next question. Is you're looking at that and you're looking at the risk, and is there coordinations about the different aspects of personal property? I mean, you've got personal property, you've got IT assets, you've got facilities. Is there coordination, and how do the risks differ between those different types of subgroups of assets? And then how do you try to bring that together into a consolidated risk management approach?
Right, that's a tricky wicket. Each of the asset types have just a little bit of a different need, and then we also have to balance that with things like our administration. They have different focus areas that they want to target, and the focus areas that they want to target may leave other assets in the wake for a little while. There's also nothing like a good crisis. You get to a point where the like IT assets. Remember a few years back where we had some computers that had been stolen, and then all of a sudden there was an IT focus over IT assets for several years, and new controls were put in place. Whereas had the person actually just took care of their laptop appropriately and not left it in the car, the reaction meter went way off the deep end. Conversely, when we're talking about servers being hacked, that is a different IT issue with a completely different risk profile. So, all of these have to be weighed together so that we can look at the department as a whole. It's a challenge. It is a very big challenge, but we're trying the best we can.
It is a big challenge, and what your statement reminded me of something I heard. We had a president of the NPMA who I plugged earlier, named Mike Hay, and he was a director of risk management for the state of Texas. And his byline essentially was, asset management is no big deal until it's a big deal, and then it's a really big deal. So risk management has been part and parcel of personal property management and asset management since really its inception. And I'm very interested in how you've presented it. Thank you for enlightening us, and I'm sure there is a lot more coming forward. Do you have contact information you'd like to share with anybody that's on this webinar in the event that they would like to contact you and ask you a direct question?
Sure, I will type it into the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you. Does anybody else have any more questions for Amber? We're at the end of the time frame that we originally planned on. So Amber, thank you very much. It was a very, very interesting conversation, and I wish you best of luck as you get your arms around this incredibly large project and program that you're working.
Thank you.
So as we transition to the next group, we're going to go from more of a DoD-centric philosophy to federal civilian. Our next speaker is Bill Garrett, who's with the GSA. He's the Director of Personal Property Management Policy in the Office of Asset and Transportation Management. And first time I met Bill, I think he was transitioning into the civilian government. We were both on a panel in about 2005 in Roslyn, Virginia, speaking. And so, Bill, you've done very well for yourself, and very pleased to see that you are sitting in the chair that you're sitting in. We're very interested to hear your perspective on reconsidering government assets and what you see for asset management going forward. So, Bill, welcome. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and give a little more background for perspective, that would be great. So, thank you for joining us today. We have volume, Bill?
Okay. You hear me now?
I hear you now, Bill.
I've been having technical issues. It may be a personal thing. I don't know. But thank you, Bob, for the introduction. It's hard to believe it's been that long since we first met. Similar to what Amber said, really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to the ALN. And I'll also throw out good words for MPMA. I've certainly been the beneficiary of being a part of that organization for a number of years now. It's always a great experience to be on these panels, particularly to hear what the other panelists have to say. So again, appreciate the opportunity to be here. So there was really two things I wanted to touch on. Actually, before I get to that, I'll give a brief intro. If you don't know, I just filled the position of Director of Personal Property Management Policy within the Office of Government-Wide Policy at GSA. Joined here in January, and then COVID came around, so that's been interesting. But it's been a great experience, huge learning curve, still have so much more to learn. But two things I wanted to touch on was one, regulations, which is a significant part of what we do in the office here, and then data and as it relates to regulations. Before I got to GSA, I certainly knew that there was this big gap between acquisition and disposal. I often would reach out to GSA and say, well, what about this middle part? What do we do? And typically the response was referring us to standards, encouraging us to reach out to other agencies for best practices. And so that's what we did, and that's what other agencies do. So my thought on that is that we, the office that we're in, the part that we play in that, is that we need to, where it makes sense, to continue to push the envelope on our authority to write regulation for that in-use portion of the life cycle, which is, for me, where I sit, is critical. You know, it's like what Jim was saying a number of days ago. It's really the part of where we extract the value from our assets, and so I see one of the significant responsibilities in our office is to persevere and be patient in trying to do that where it makes sense. You know, my understanding, and Dave, you know, was at GSA for decades. I'm sure he's aware of the many efforts in trying to do that. There have been reasons, my understanding, I've already been in conversations in trying to do just that. There are valid reasons. And one of the big education I've had is understanding the lens of the different stakeholders, how they see this issue, the concerns that they have. And really my challenge is to address those. So where data falls into that is very much integrated into regulation. I simply, there has to be an effective manager of your portfolio, there has to be an integration, again, from where I sit, from acquisition through the in-use portion of those assets to disposal and repeat as appropriate. I certainly see it as a circular path, and where data has to play a part in that. The previous agency I was at, we quickly realized how difficult it is to do that and wrap our hands around that. The large agency I was at, basically the organization, similar to the way regulations are written, is the agencies or the smaller organizations are left to their own devices to come up with policy, to establish data and systems. And then down the road, if you try to pull all those organizations, the policies and the data together after the fact, it's an extremely complex and difficult thing to do, to establish taxonomies and data dictionaries where the data is really apples to apples. But it's something that I think is certainly worth the effort. Fortunately, in the meantime, we have these wonderful standards and these extremely smart people that have worked and continue to work on establishing that to assist in that effort. I think where I sit is to the challenge is to focus on the short term and the decisions right in front of you, but always keep in mind the long-term goal. I'm still working to figure that out. When I often am challenged with that, I reach out to the smarter folks in the room to help me keep that goal in mind. So those are generally the thoughts I had. Are there any questions? Bob, I don't know if anything's come across.
I haven't seen anything come across, but I do have a question, and that is, you know, as before I was talking to Amber and I asked about standards. And so I was curious about where the GSA is, and particularly your office, and how you're looking at standards and what standards, and are you looking at applying any of those more, you know, like ISO 55000, for example, into the overall initiative that you've got going, particularly the area with, you talked about the data and the taxonomies of getting standardized data to be able to talk about assets in a consistent fashion across the entire landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. My answer is similar to Amber's. It's really about looking at ISO 55000 as the framework, the overlay, as it's really in a way kind of keeping the long-term goal in mind of what we're really trying to do, is keeping that framework in mind when we're making the decisions that are right in front of us. For me, and also at the prior agency I was at, it's been extremely helpful in keeping that in mind, and also helping to educate the other stakeholders involved, particularly in the regulation side. You know, they certainly have their perspective, but I see it as my responsibility to, again, educate them. And I often rely on ISO 55000 and other standards in doing that education.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. We have a question from Marty Rowland, and it describe how value is created with personal property. Do we always compare against having non-movable assets?
Yeah, so value to me, and again, I'll go back to my time at my prior agency, is I was always, any opportunity I got was trying to break down the barriers between our various offices. So a really easy example that I often use was the CIO office, the significant amount of IT assets. And I often made the argument, I would often 6 or 8 months after getting a brand new iPhone or BlackBerry, then someone would show up in my office and give me a new one. It was perfectly fine. I didn't need a new one. So could we have the conversation about extending, the life cycle of those assets? And if we were to do that, I often use the Jim Dieter example is, if we take the line item on the financial statements and we were to extract 1% more from those assets, it's a pretty, IT assets is an easy example because we all use them. I think we're all familiar with, from the IT perspective, I get it. They're very interested in the updating technology and all the things that they have to be concerned about. But if we, again, break down those walls, those barriers with the IT office, with the finance office, the procurement office, the real property office, and have more discussions across those offices to hopefully make better decisions.
So are there any thoughts about working towards compliance mechanisms in any of these areas, like audits, perhaps based on strategic asset management plans, for example?
Well, my office really isn't a compliance arm. Again, I'll go back to my prior agency I was at. That was a real struggle, the compliance piece. We often would argue with the auditors as they often come through, and they would take a close look and say, hey, your policies are pretty good, but how do you know they're actually doing it? And we would say, we simply don't have the resources. It really came down to resources. But we started to figure out small ways to conduct assessments to get a general sense of how the organizations were doing. I think probably the most benefit, instead of coming through with the stick and beating folks over the head for not complying, was really about having just that conversation from folks in the field on how the policies were received and how how ultimately we could improve our policy. Because I mean, here at GSA, I certainly see the regulations as just that. It's got to be helpful to those that have to comply with it. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does, and thank you. It's kind of hard to mandate compliance, and it's kind of like herding cats, and I'm sure Amber has a lot of stories about trying to herd those cats around. Some of that may just come down to training, and for people to understand what asset management is all about. And so kind of the follow-up question that came from Boyd Beal was, do you have any mandated training for people on asset management or ISO 55000 or any other subjects that would appropriate apply to what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the mandate aspect of that, but I do know, and Dave could certainly talk more about this, but on the operational side of GSA, in regards to personal property, there's a significant amount of training that they conduct year in and year out. As many folks in the government know, for better or for worse, those that are actually truly managing assets in the field it's often collateral duty. They often, some don't necessarily take much interest in doing that, but probably more important is their folks are often brand new to that task. So it's a big challenge in keeping folks up to speed on how to properly manage their assets. And like I said, on the operational side of GSA, they do a tremendous job with significant amount of training throughout the year.
Great, great. So as we're coming down to kind of the end of this little subsection of our panel today, I have a question that came in, and it was like, coming from a background in multiple agencies, what was your biggest surprise coming into your current role?
Oh, wow. That's really easy. I have to say, there was a bit of arrogance stepping into this position, thinking that I knew a lot about the regulations and how they are interchanged with themselves, and I didn't know much at all. And so it's been very humbling and really a wonderful experience so far. I've just been here a little less than a year. But yeah, is really, that's been the biggest thing is, I started, well, actually I started as an auditor on the private side. And then at the property management system arena for a little bit, and then have been at Commerce, DHS, and now GSA. Throughout all that experience, I thought I had the regs down pat. Nope. I've got a lot to learn, and it's actually wonderful because it seems like every day I get questions, for those affected by the regs and asking for interpretation and how does this relate to standards and so on and so forth. It's just wonderful and such a great education for me. So that's definitely been it.
Yeah, well, there's that great aspect of regulations and following regulations, but it seems to me that leadership is the most important attribute that somebody has in terms of making significant change and positive change and improvement in asset management systems. And you have you're kind of a shining star for taking on leadership roles and exhibiting outstanding leadership, and that's one of the reasons why you are where you are today. And I'm just curious as what you might be able to tell people on this about sort of leadership training, where they might go for it, what they may do to improve their leadership skills, and what have you done that's helped you in your career to get to this point where you are a significant leader in the federal government?
Wow. Part of that was tremendous compliment. Thank you so much. I don't know if it was deserved. But to answer the question, I probably the biggest thing I've learned for me in my professional career about leadership is really about listening to those affected by the decisions that I make, and also listening to my colleagues, and being very aware of particularly the strong leaders around me, and doing the best I can. I often, one of my officers in the Navy that was my supervisor for a period of time, he often used the idea of the good bag and bad bag, and always being aware of the good things that you see around you, and keeping track of that in the good bag, and anything bad you see, make sure you're just as aware of that. So beyond that, as far as leadership training, there's particularly in the last 5 or 10 years, plethora of training, not just in organizations that do just that, but also I've found just recently is a lot of the more significant universities across our country are providing really good training regarding leadership. I actually just took one the last 6 or 8 weeks at the Darden School at UVA. And the title was Leading Mindfully During Crisis. I thought it was appropriate considering, our situation that we're in. And it was a wonderful class, not just the instructors, but the participants learned so much from them. So.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for your insight. There is a comment from Cecilia that said, love your understanding that true leadership is listening and looking to others to lead where they can. So thank you, Bill, for your insight. And your email has been posted up into the chat window so people can get to you, your gsa.gov email if they have questions. And thank you, and I'm sure you'll stick around for the balance of this. I wanted, before we get to our next speaker, I wanted to highlight and make people aware that Dave Robbins is on the line, and following our next presentation, Dave is going to lead a session where we discuss where we discuss Bob Holcomb. There'll be an opportunity for people to reflect on Bob's life and his service to the government in many different ways, and what he has done for asset management and how he's helped everybody. So if somebody's got some things, anybody on the line that's got some things that they'd like to share about Bob or some memories with Bob, we will be doing that after the next presentation, so everybody can have a little heads up on that. And then also Dave did put a comment up regarding the training. And he said, Bill is correct. GSA's Office of Personal Property Management does offer training for agencies. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that regardless of the office's name, it manages and operates the federal disposal program. So that is the focus of the training. And as Bill said, GSA does not have responsibility for overall agency asset management, but there are other training opportunities via NPMA, USA Graduate School, and others. So thank you, Bill, and what a great transition that is, because training is very important, and our next speaker is probably the most well-known educator in the field of asset management. Dr. Douglas Getz got his doctorate at the Ohio State University, and he'd be happy and very proud to talk about that all day. And I do carry a Buckeye in my briefcase that Doug provided to me and picked up when we were able to meet him and his lovely wife at Ohio State University's Horseshoe for a football game several years ago. Dr. Doug Getz was with Defense Acquisition University. He is in the Hall of Fame for Defense Acquisition University, DAU. He is the president and CEO of GP Consulting, and as I said, probably the leading authority on training for asset management. And you are in for a treat now. So Doug Getz, please join us and try to keep everybody safe and sane through this. Try not to excite people too much as they go through what you're going to share with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Douglas Getz.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. Boy, that's some welcome there. So I greatly appreciate that. I'm an educator, I'm an academic, and therefore I do have to have slides, talking points, things that I consider critical and essential. So thinking about this topic, government assets reconsidered, my first perspective was to label this to infinity and beyond. And then I realized, no, that's already been taken, so I can't use that one. So I want to talk about the past to the present to the future, some thoughts after 40 years of doing property and asset management. So want to cover some of these issues. So first off, thank you. Oh, this is so cool. I have not had the opportunity to address the Asset Leadership Network before. Most of my work has been at other places, or I've just been doing other things at the time when the meeting. So this is an absolutely superb opportunity. With a condition, a caveat that my work has primarily focused on the contractual requirements related to DoD government property. So I might have a slightly more focused perspective in some ways, but in other ways I've tried to broaden that out and act in a slightly philosophical nature there. So I'm going to talk about some old stuff, some current stuff, some technical stuff, some emerging stuff, some future stuff, and all within the time frame that I've been given. So some old stuff. So if we were to deal with government property with a U.S. view, certainly we could take that from the Revolutionary War. We actually have literature that talks about the problems that we as this emerging nation, as this rebellious group of hodgepodge of colonies, had concerns with acquiring property and furnishing property and making sure that it was used properly. My note there from a biblical standpoint, I won't go back as far as Genesis, that might be too far for property management, all right? There are constitutional foundations for property, for asset management of various types that the founders realized that the ownership of property and assets was critical. Well, my knowledge in areas of expertise, as I said, was contract property, and really want to take it from post-World War II concerns because Jim is a good friend. I did have to clarify that no, I was not alive during World War II. He probably dates me back to the Civil War. That was meant to be humorous, but I am a student of history, and therefore that's critical that we understand history versus reliving the Santayama quote, that if we're ignorant of that history. So if I look at the history for the roughly 60 years, looking at government property in the possession of contractors, the issue has always been compliance. The baseball bat, beat them over the head, make sure that they do that. And I need to look at some of the controlling documents that were out there. Things like the Armed Services Procurement Regulation, the Defense Acquisition Regulations, the original FAR. Now, I know we talk about the SAMP a lot, and it takes us, under ISO 55000, takes a slightly different perspective there. But an interesting note that from the early days, the original days of the aspirin DAR, we took a systems approach to managing property and assets. We required the application of a property management system or systems, and this has been in place for the past 70 years. How do I find that? I'm an academic, so I go to the literature. So looking at things like the Armed Services Procurement Regs, there was actually in 1953 a manual for the control of government property in the possession of contractors. The issue with that, it was highly prescriptive. No concern about cost, no concern about value, no concern about any value added. It was telling the contractors specifically what and how to control assets. No, the word that I use there, the word used in the regulation is control, vis-a-vis a broader statement of being able to manage that stuff. Our overarching concerns, just make sure you have records and you can find the stuff. Well, there was a name change back in the late 70s that they didn't like the name ASPR, the Armed Service Procurement Regs. They changed it to the DAR, the Defense Acquisition Regulations. There was no change. The rules were the same, they just changed the name, all right? Well, then in 1984, due to a statutory requirement, we had the publication of the original Federal Acquisition Regulation, 1984. A small humorous note, the date of issuance was April 1st. My humorous note below that, perfect date for the publication of a government regulation. Sorry, Bill, I know you're responsible for the FAR, GSA. I had to throw that in there, okay? He's smiling, right? But no effort or quantum leap was made to improve the management of stuff. All they did was they took the DAR and they smushed it all together. Well, that really wasn't a cool deal. What can we do to improve this stuff? Well, starting in 1995, there was a major effort to rewrite the FAR section on government property, started by Ms. Eleanor Spector as Director of Defense Procurement, and then from an NPMA standpoint, finished by one of her own, Mr. Tom Ruckdashel, who was at DCMA at the time, published in 2007. Wait a minute, 95, 2005, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years to rewrite a rule? Wow. Now, one of the issues there is it still required that property management system, but there were significant alterations and improvements. So I need to talk about those just for a minute. Compliance, of course, within a government rule is a fait accompli. We've got to address that. We're spending the taxpayers' might. GAO loves to write us up and tell us where we're not doing well. So compliance is always going to be an issue. But there was a streamlining of the requirements. We went from 19 clauses down to 3 and added certain issues. The issue of value was now a consideration. The issue of risk management was now a consideration. Yes, there was a continued requirement for a property management system, but in the clause, we called out the processes and outcomes, a life cycle approach that was now legitimatized in the regulation. Now, NPMA, in all of its writings from its origins 50 years ago, talked about this life cycle approach in its literature. Acquisition, receiving, record, storage, movement, consumption, utilization, physical inventories, disposition. But this was the first time that it was actually called out and said, thou shalt structure, thou shalt have processes, outcomes to address this. There was also the big thing, the allowance of the use of voluntary consensus standards. 2 other things, industry-leading practices and commercial practices, but I really like the issue of voluntary commercial consensus standards. Why? It was driven by law. Driven by law that said, yo, stop using DoD military specifications when a commercial application, a voluntary consensus standard could be used. We, in point of fact, within DoD had military specs and military standards for fruitcake, for T-shirts, really, for brownies. Hello, why would we need something to that specificity when in point of fact those were commercial items? So really interesting concern there. 2007, and here we are in 2020, in my opinion, a lot's changed. And it might be time for a refresh, to look at some new things, to possibly say, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? What about ISO 55000 and its additions that are there? Might be an interesting time. Some other old stuff. We have the Chief Financial Officer Act of 1990. I know Amber loves this law dearly. It is her sole driver for No, I'm kidding, Amber, right? And its requirement was to improve the government's financial management. Simply put, government property was one area called out as lacking, internal to the government, but it also impacted my area of focus, government property in the possession of contractors. Now, I have a small acerbic comment here. It took 17 years for the government in the FAR to recognize its fiduciary requirement to maintain records. Now, why do I say that? It wasn't until the 2007 FAR rewrite, 1990, the law was passed. 2007, it was actually changed where we dispelled that notion that contractors kept the government's official records for property. Rather interestingly, I think that created a whole furor. Amber, of course, was responsible for DODI 5064, creating the Accountable Property System of Record, an APSR, not to be confused with the ASPRA. So rather interesting that we see these type of changes being driven from an accounting standpoint. That's Chief Financial Officer Act definitely led to FIRE, the Financial Improvement Audit Readiness, remediation, right? And a small little dig in the side of my agency. DOD has not received a clean audit opinion. I'm sure Amber had addressed that. I thought you would, Amber, but we have not got one. Other non-DOD activities have. NASA, and they constantly rub my nose into it. They have a clean audit opinion in accordance with the Chief Financial Officer. DOE does. So wait a minute. That's looking at it from an accounting standpoint. And I'll echo words that have already been stated, not only today, but in previous presenters. There was no holistic perspective. The singular focus was on accounting rules with no systematic integration with asset management. Interesting. Amber has mentioned, and Bill has mentioned, that now they're looking at this more integrated approach, all right? But I have to say this is really cool. People are looking at us, which is not all bad. We have VCSs, value-added functions, interconnectivity, data requirements, big data, and of course ISO 55000 plus its additions. So let me talk about these for a minute. VCSs, such a powerful document. At the C-suite level, oh my goodness, 55,000, 55,001, 55,002, some expansion there. And from my readings, there are even more coming, 55,010, 55,011. Powerful document at the top levels. Bill in the GSA representation applying to all of the government would be such a powerful move. The floor or working level documents, the ASTM VCSs, the E53 committee, those are more the how-to, the specific standards, the quantifications related to performance, specific application concerns that were lacking in the past. We did things the way we did them because that's the way we always did them. And a dear friend had this quote, if we always do what we always did, we will always get what we always got. And that doesn't work today. Doesn't work today. I've seen a gradual shift from compliance to value-added, synergistic approaches, these holistic approaches. And one of my favorites comes out of an NBMA publication by Bob McFarland. He did a series of articles on value-based asset management, documented evidence of property management value. Absolutely superb quantification. You know, we always like to say, well, what value does this bring? Here, in his empirical research, provided us empirical evidence of the cost savings, the cost benefit of why we need to do this properly. And here's the cool part, so that you don't think it was an isolated incident, an N of one. There have been a number of other corporations and entities that replicated his application to show its value. Really cool issues there. The interconnectivity of systems. One of the things that DoD did as a reactive issue due to our multiple wars in the Balkans, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, where there were very harsh concerns raised about DoD contractors, was creating these business system rules. There are 6 of them. They all overlap. I would encourage you to look at another article by Mickelson and Ruckdash talking about the interconnectivity of DFAR's business system. Now I have these circular rings over there, the overlap. We are involved in all of these aspects within a systems approach. Very interesting article. From the Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, the PIEE, or if you watch some commercials, I jokingly refer to it as the PIE. Okay, that one didn't go over either. Things like the IUID registry, the GFP module, where all of these data collection points have now have the opportunity for interoperational ability, interconnectivity, so that we can start looking at that. Now, a shout out to Jim Dieter from day one of the virtual conference. he had a number of excellent charts listing the variety of activities involved with asset management, even more reinforcement within a DoD perspective we can see here. So, and that leads us to this issue that we now have, or will have, better access to data, big data, and that is a real driver within the corporate world today, within the advertising world, within the marketing world, within the production and supply chain management world. We're going to start having access to all of that stuff to help our world as well. As an academic, I have to cite literature, as I said before. This text was referred to me, about 10 years ago. Dieter and Fulster, I have to be able to say his name. He's got the double dot over the O, and I can never do that. Public Wealth of Nations, how management of public assets can boost or bust economic growth. In this day and age, where we are today with the pandemic going on in the United States, this is an interesting topic. The key characteristics that are there are focus on value and creating value, eliminating politics, which has been mentioned by Professor Smith on day one, which unfortunately is tough to do. Hire professionals to do this. So it may not be an issue of bringing people in at the lowest level, but rather bringing people in who have the ability, without the political issues, to run the things and make the changes that need to be made. Now, I actually pulled the text from my bookshelf here. It's a very deep book. It is not easy to get through, but I encourage you. I think you'd find it of value to see how these other countries and corporations have looked at this, viewing our assets there. So to close up, one of the areas that I really focused in on as going for my doctorate was the issue of professions. What is a profession, all right? I needed to look at that. I needed to look at some of the characteristics that were out there. So I've worked for DoD about 40 years now. And I'm sorry to say, for us, the US and DoD, the leadership of property and asset management, that's my little acronym there, PAM, is often left to political perspectives, putting out fires, responding to audits, driven by, well, what's our current policy and procedure and what programs are critical? More times than not, we were reactive versus being proactive. Well, again, Dieter and Fulster's research supports hiring professionals and remove the politics. Now, Bill is at a very high level. Amber is at a very high level. Politics does play a role, regrettably. It'd be so cool if we could move away from that and do what is necessary to make our systems work there. One issue that I have to deal with is the issue of education and training. So when I was hired back in 1978 as a lowly GS5, we went by the OPM Handbook X118. It is still out there today. We can look at that and see that structure there. I'm sorry, I have a problem with that. The OPM personal standards do not even recognize asset management. Wait a minute, what have they been doing? I'll show you what they've been doing. It is a 1940s task-based standard, latest iteration, June of 1970, saying, okay, property people do this, do the other thing, do that. And you can see it, there's the link there. In 2020, we are still using the same standard. Uh-oh, wait a minute. And what I found, though, because I'm involved with other entities, this little organization over in Great Britain, the United Kingdom there, has this government property profession. There's their link. And as a career framework, they have a very logical, orderly progression up the roles, and they ultimately become a profession. They become those professionals that lead the government. I'd encourage you, take a look at it. Really interesting standard that we could learn from, that OPM could learn from in that regard. So really, we're still using a 50-year-old classification standard. Got a problem with that, small problem. OPM, in my opinion, is using a horse and buggy. We need to move to alternative fuels vehicles, right? So get contemporary. So talked about this issue of characteristics of a profession. professionalization. I have seen this huge quantum increase of our professionalization. And here are the elements that Cyril Houle defined it as a profession: theoretical knowledge, practical knowledge, capacity to solve problems, formal training and education. And you've heard those questions being raised about training and education, credentialing, self-enhancement. Notice I haven't read public acceptance with an asterisk. Ethical practice, penalties, other things, right? Public acceptance, I think, is our weakest area. People don't know exactly what it is that we do on the grand scale, and sometimes even on the small scale. So my challenge in regard to the future is to influence and implement the use of an asset management system with asset leadership in place and working. For the US government, I want it across the board. I want it across the entire enterprise, across the entire spectrum. Hey, Bill, here's your assignment for next week. You can do this in a week, all right? Now, not just Department of Defense, but the entire US government in all aspects of asset management. And not to sound religious, because people say I get up on my soapbox every once in a while, maybe we all need to become asset management evangelists. I've listened to some of the speakers over the past few days, and wow, what they are preaching in some quarters might be viewed as heresy. But for us who live this on a day-to-day basis, this is our challenge, this is our improvement. So with that said, look, guys, I encourage the Asset Leadership Network and all other related professional associations we've heard about, NPMA, and their leaders and members of each of us to continue to fight the good fight, show our value, show our worth, showing the impact proper asset management can have when given its rightful due and attention from the worker on the floor to the highest level of the boardroom and the government. Point of contact, ladies and gentlemen, that's me. I got a haircut for this presentation, so my hair's not as long on the caricature. There's my phone number. There's my email. There's my website. Would be glad to hear from any of you. So, Bob, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you got anything there, any comments that came in?
Yeah, we've got some coming in, Doug. Thank you very much. Equal amounts of information and exuberance, which I very much appreciate. You know, I have a question for you as these other ones come in. And that is, as an educator and been doing this, you know, for about as long as Moses has been around, I think. People have often accused you of looking like Moses and having the wisdom of Moses as well, I might say. But if you started a new training class today, you've got a clean sheet of paper. You can educate asset management professionals on anything that was on your mind. What would it be? And why? What would the class consist of, and how would you deliver it, and why is it important?
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. You've made me king of the forest, huh? So quite clearly, now I am not an expert in ISO 55000 and its additional items, but I'd start right there. I would start right there as the opening salvo, as the opening volley, explain its requirements, explain its applications. Second, then, go to the other voluntary consensus standards that are out there. And then if this was dependent upon the form and structure of, say, a regular semester class, take that then through the life cycle processes as application that serves value to that. But certainly in this day and age, you got to put the ISO 55000 at the very top level. All right, very top level. I can see the chat box there. Mea culpa, if I called it the Federal Acquisition Requirements, oh my goodness, you'd think I know that since 1984. Sorry, Mike, I'll fix that on the next slide. For those of you who made disparaging comments, Dave, about Ohio State University, right, every dog has its day, and yes.
There's an interesting question from Mike. It was technology and management processes have improved dramatically since 2007. So revisiting the FAR makes sense. What would it take to encourage a rewrite?
Ooh, better answer. Get a better answer of that from Bill. Certainly, DoD is a major player, but GSA is the daddy of it. So they're involved with the DAR Council and the Civilian Agency Council, changing regulations today under the current environment, political environment, I'm saying, might be a little bit on the difficult side. Though there are changes being made piecemeal, bits and pieces by various DoD requirements out there. Can't give you a good answer on that one, Bob. I'll leave it to the much smarter people than me on my left-hand side of the screen here.
Okay, well, in that case, any thoughts on asset management and crisis management and how they would intersect?
Absolutely, there's an intersectivity to both. Look at the pandemic today. Everybody's pointing fingers as to having personal protective equipment. Why did we have this? Well, what were the planning stages to handle that crisis? How much could we acquire beforehand? How much could we store? And what would the cost be associated with storing that? What would the supply chain management look like, and what could we do to acquire things of that nature? We've seen these hurricanes come barreling through, and our prayers have to be with New Orleans and the states in the South that are facing hurricane after hurricane. What do we need to do, and how does FEMA look at asset management and the ability to pre-position, the ability for rapid deployment? Oh my goodness, crisis management and asset management, they go hand in hand, because if you fail on one, you're going to fail on the other. And I think we saw that a little bit with the pandemic, that we did not have things like the ventilators, insufficient quantity to provide. And then we started yelling and screaming and ranting and raving and trying to put into place DPAS, the Defense Production Act requirements for rapid acquisitions that are there. We all like to think everything's going to go along fine, but the real world is bad stuff happens. Right? So, cool issue.
Okay, well, we're kind of at the end of our time, but there are two public service announcements that I'd like to make. One is that highlight, you referenced the Wealth of Nations earlier, and Dag Detter, who's the author of that, actually presented at the ALN's Asset Management Forum, or Asset Leadership Forum in 2016 at the National Academies.
Oh my!
So he was, and I was there, and I recall it, and it was a very interesting discussion. And in person, he simplifies the book quite a bit. It's much easier to get through listening to him.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. The second public service announcement comes from Marty Rowland, and he says ASTM, and this is regarding your professional discussion when you're talking about the making asset management a profession. And he says ASTM E3210 infrastructure management is all about public acceptance. So we're moving on it, and I know that you have been a great proponent of making asset management a true profession, and I appreciate it, and appreciate all that you've done for the ALN and for NPMA and the government property asset management profession in general, for the time that you spent at DAU and trained literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of people in the skills of asset management, but also in really looking at, from a value perspective, what asset and property management, or PAM, may do for organizations, for individuals, as well as for our society in general. So thank you very much, Doug, for that. Appreciate it. As always, great presentation. Thank you for that. So now we're at this time, I'd like to introduce Dave Robbins. Dave Robbins is one of those people that it seemed like everything that I was involved in asset management, every place I went, every seminar I attended, every NPMA lunch I attended, seemed like Dave was there. And so we'd like to, Dave is retired from GSA now, but he wanted to take this opportunity to lead this group in a special tribute to Bob Holcomb, who served the U.S. federal government for decades in a number of different areas, including most recently at GSA Department of Government-Wide Policy. So, Dave, thank you very much for doing this, and welcome, and nice to see you again, sir.
Thank you, Bob. Nice to see you as well. Found it interesting that Doug even talked about, U.S. property going back to the Revolutionary War. And even towards the end of my career at GSA, we were still dealing with Revolutionary War assets. Just because they sink in a lake doesn't mean the government gives up ownership of those assets. So it was always something interesting going on. I joined GSA a couple of years before Bob did. I knew Bob beforehand from, some interagency groups that we had both served with or attended meetings in the DC area. Bob was at the Department of Justice initially at that time. But once he joined GSA, and then as I gained the role as the director of the Office of Personal Property Management, Bob and I had an opportunity to work closely together. We weren't just colleagues, we became friends. And our relationship was a little unusual. I mean, we were certainly a customer agency as a user of the federal regulations, but being in the same agency, we were also more colleagues and had a somewhat unique relationship, even on collaboration on developing some of those regulations. As well as the regulations, I had an opportunity to work closely with Bob when developing the National Strategy for Electronic Stewardship under an Obama administration executive order, developing the FMR requirements that are still in use. Well, the FMR bulletin, it's been a challenge still to actually incorporate those requirements for electronic stewardship. Bob and I also worked closely in the development and final implementation of federal asset sales and the GovSales website, which implemented federal asset sales, which I see actually got killed in the last week. But Bob was still active at work, and he had changed his retirement date and planned on retiring on October 1st. Unfortunately, after his diagnosis of cancer about 18 months ago, he didn't make it that far, and Bob passed away on the morning of September 7th after his battle with cancer. He was surrounded by his wife and daughters, which is important as they were so terribly important to him. Bob's career in asset management began upon his graduation from college when he entered the Naval Supply Corps as a Navy supply officer. He had an overall more than 34 years working in asset management with the federal government. During this time, his expertise was acknowledged at many levels, and he received numerous awards and recognition. And he would still say that one of the highlights of his career was when he received an award personally from Attorney General Janet Reno for his extraordinary service in the Department of Justice. Most of us know Bob really through his work with asset management, but he was a religious man, a member of his church for 31 years. He was a life member of the Aquia Harbor Volunteer Rescue Squad in his local community. And as many of us know, he was definitely fond of his Harley Davidson, taking singular trips to even many of the locations for NPMA NES. Can't imagine still some of the road trips he took on that bike. He also liked camping and geocaching with his family and friends. Bob was an active member of our chapter of the NPMA, the Federal Center chapter, received several awards from our chapter, including the Outstanding Member and Bernie Bartel Lifetime Achievement Award from our chapter. Nationally, he was recognized as Federal Property Manager of the Year in 2016 and capped his experience by receiving the Andrew Anderson Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. Beyond NPMA, Bob was also greatly involved in working with ASTM, served as the chair of the E53 committee, and was the author of the Warehousing and Fleet Standards. And after that, he did receive the Dieter Hesterman Award from E53. He was also a member of the U.S. TAG, Technical Advisory Group, representing the U.S. in the development of ISO 55000. So without a doubt, and we can see that Bob had many achievements in the world of asset management, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is who he meant to each of us as a colleague and a friend, and that's how we're going to miss him most. So those are just some comments I wanted to make. Appreciate Jim asking me to lead this, and certainly we want to open this up to anyone else who would like to make any comments.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. This is Jim Dieter, for those that might not know me. I often say that I can't imagine my career without NPMA. And in fact, it would have just been a job. It wouldn't have been a career without the NPMA. And it's really informed all we've done with the Asset Leadership Network. And I think Bob exemplifies the kind of person and just the amazing difference he made in people's lives, that he made in my life by just doing his job in the way that he saw fit to do it, and to connect with people and to help and encourage them and to put people in a position to succeed, always be accessible and available. I remember many coffee breaks and lunches at the cafeteria in this building, and we would talk about the asset management, the future, many things like Doug's great presentation today. But I can't, I know I can't express, but I really feel the loss. I really feel the loss of Bob deeply. I also want to mention that another great NPMA person, Tom Williams, has passed away in the last few days as well, former NPMA president. But we're talking about Bob today, and I just, it's another chance to say thank you to Bob, and just really appreciate everything you brought. Ah, there's a picture of Bob, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could like to jump in with a few words if I could. Oh yeah, great shots of Bob. So thanks for sharing those, Mike. That's cool. All right. I always viewed Bob as the quintessential professional, the true professional. He was always warm and welcoming. He was sort of like this gentle giant, a fairly large man. I'm 6'2", but even I had to look up to Bob. He was slightly larger than I was, right? The interesting point to me was that even in disagreement, he was always that consummate professional. And one issue comes to mind. We were having a knockdown, drag-out argument, not a fight, we didn't fight, over a technical issue. Bob looked at it one way, I was diametrically opposed. We were at far ends of the spectrum there, yet he was always the nicest man to work with. Here's the issue that we could yell and scream at each other and say, no, look, you're not seeing this, you don't understand. And right after that, it was like, oh, where are we going for lunch? Do we want to go for a drink or something? Like, that was the business part that had to be resolved. But Bob was this kind, compassionate, understanding guy. And Dave, I don't know, but even though he lost that argument, which I had to bring out, I never saw him get angry. I never saw him get angry, which was, I got to compliment him. So Bob will live in our memories with the NPMA, always recognized with the Andy Anderson Lifetime Achievement Award. Bob's right up there as a true professional. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Is there anybody in the audience that would like to share? I think that Nick might be able to unmute somebody if there's anybody out in the participants that are watching this that would like to say anything. I just leave a chat or get to Nick and he can unmute you. I just like to say that I first met Bob probably later in his career than most of you. It was the early 2000s, and I was working with the Department of Justice and Jan Dobbs at the time, and she introduced me just to this big teddy bear of a guy that was immediately my best friend, it seemed. And I can honestly say that I'm not sure I've ever met a kinder, more individual that always seemed to care more about you than anything else. He gave me so much confidence to move forward in what I was doing. He gave me a lot of advice and always did it in a way that, like Jim and Doug have both said, it was a way that was encouraging, never divisive, and always with a smile on his face. And I recall having many discussions with him about his long rides, asking him, hearing some of the stories about his motorcycle trips across the country. I think he came out to Phoenix one time on his motorcycle from the East Coast, and I enjoyed following his exploits as he shared on Facebook and some other social media as he took these great trips. And I feel like I lived vicariously through Bob quite a bit, and it always put a smile on my face because I never think I ever saw Bob without a smile on his face. So I will miss him greatly as well.
Yeah, if I may, this is Bill. I just wanted to add a few more things. Certainly similar comments about Bob. I met him certainly later in his career, initially through MPMA when I joined, and quickly realized he was certainly a cornerstone of that organization and the broader industry, and always looked up to him and admired his depth of experience and knowledge. Certainly one of the highlights of my career was essentially backfilling his position, and was fortunate to work with him when I started work in January. It was such an honor and humbling to work with him so closely during that 9 or 10 months. And again, the words that everyone shared is so true. Oh my goodness, the kindness and the patience that he had with what I was probably calling him 5 times a day or emailing him, and he would always give me the time that I needed with a smile on his face, never showing any sense of, Bill, leave me alone kind of thing. Just such a truly gentleman, and he will certainly be missed.
Thanks, Bill. So we've reached the end of our allotted time. We can stay over if anybody else has any words they'd like to express. But outside of that, I'm going to turn it back to Nick. Let me thank each and every one of you for participating, but particularly our panelists, Amber, Bill, Doug, and of course, Dave. Thank you very much for giving your time freely to support the efforts of the ALN, particularly around about reimagining what asset management can be, and where we can go and what we can do to improve our lives, our government, and the overall status of asset management throughout the market. So again, thank everybody everybody for being here. And with that, I'll turn it back to Nick to close this up.
Yeah, well, just to reiterate, thank you all panelists and attendees for being here, and really great to hear those kind words about Bob. And, you know, I didn't meet him personally, but learn a little more about him here today in this way. That was really good. And yeah, I'd just like to take a second to show again our organizational members here at the Asset Leadership Network and thank them, because without them, none of this would be possible. And yeah, other than that, I think we're gonna leave the meeting going, not like end it immediately for everyone. So if anyone wants to stay around from the audience to talk, we can maybe promote you to a panelist or something so we can have a more personal discussion. But of course,
Nick,
no one. Yeah. Hey, Mike.
I would like to say something. Can
Please
you
do.
share in your screen? I want to share because like you, Nick, I did not know Bob as much as these other people, but he did present at the Asset Leadership Network every time we asked him. And matter of fact, Jim Dieter made sure that he was head of an award that we gave to the General Services Administration Office of Government-Wide Policy. And really glad that we did that. And I echo everyone's thought of how nice he was. Just amazing. He just exuded gentle kindness at all times. Didn't know him much, but I was very glad that I did.
Well, I don't see anybody else interested in or making comments right now. So let me just, having invited folks, just let me add my thanks to everybody for their great participation. Some really interesting topics. Doug, I think, you know, some of your comments about what we could do going forward. The ALN is about making things like that happen. So I'll be sending you an email. Maybe we can maybe get a team together and think about what's possible and how we could help. Make the future we imagine a reality, and how we can help people like Bill and Amber that are in the trenches getting this done, what we can do to help them. All right. Well, and Bob Taylor, thank you very much, sir, for your excellent job as a host today. Appreciate that.
And my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks to Nick and Mike and all the ALN planning team for helping put it together. We do have another session starting at 1 o'clock. And then there's a 4 o'clock session as well today. For personal property people, these, you know, are both are probably very interesting sessions. You know, people interested in broadening their perspective from a personal property perspective, especially the session at 4 o'clock led by Bob Leach, who was formerly with the Army Corps of Engineers, about what the government is doing on asset management from an infrastructure perspective. Would broaden your scope. I do think it's an amazing time to be in asset management. It's like if we were accountants when they were inventing what accounting was about. You know, that's us. So it's a real opportunity. You know, like Bill, like Amber, people that have come into this and, you know, and made it their own and taken leadership roles. Those opportunities exist for other people. Also from consulting and professional services role, there's just, you know, a lot of possibility from a professional standpoint, and how you can make the world a better place for assets. So again, thanks everybody. Great day. Hopefully we'll see you this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim.
start. Welcome to panel 2 of the IEEE International Smart Cities Conference. I'm going to turn it over to Andy Chen, who is the moderator for this session.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to IEEE International Smart City Conference 2020. This is panel 2. The theme of our panel is artificial intelligence is the brain behind the fourth industrial revolution. Before we start, just let me introduce myself. From my perspective, this panel are assembled by IEEE TAMS. I'm currently the president of IEEE TAMS. TAMS stand for Technology, Engineering, Management Society. And I'm also on the board of governors for IEEE Computer Society. I am a founder of a venture capital firm. We invest on disruptive technologies that improve the humanities. I was a senior technology officer for the largest utility company in Canada for some 30 years. I'm also the president and CEO of a technology consulting firm. Lastly, I advise on several of the board for United Nations agencies. I'd like to spend a few minutes talk about what TAMS is. TAMS, our tagline is Leaders Enabling Project Services for Good. We focus on people. Our members are in many areas of research and practice. Engineering management, technology management is old and true technologies. The discipline that we have carried on for years. We also have a lot of focus on entrepreneurship and startup, and entrepreneurship for that matter. Innovation has been always the cornerstones of our society. A lot of research in our society members are doing innovation research, and we help with our members to grow from a junior engineers eventually into the leadership positions or become a CEO of a company. A little bit history about TAMS. TAMS we started with back in 1951, Engineering Management Society, and that is one of the earlier societies that established in IEEE. Next year we'll be celebrating 70th anniversary for the society. We had at one point more than 9,000 members around the world. We became a council which set across all societies in 2007. In 2015, we transitioned back to the society which we can serve directly to the membership at large. Our publication is one of the oldest industrial publications in the field of management. We spread around the world. We have 61 chapters, 15 joint chapters, and 20 student branches across the world. The value we bring to our partner, to our members, is to advance, enhance, and improve their management skills, leadership knowledge, and to help the IEEE member to grow those areas. We also support the career path for engineers to evolve in the company or for students to evolve into entrepreneurs. We focus on knowledge transfer. How do you take from a research into the market, into the industries? Our field of interest is many, and it cut across all sectors, all societies. Technology policy, development, assessment, and transfer. That is one big area. Product design and development, manufacturing operations. And we have several conferences that focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. And program and project management is a true discipline for years and is well established amongst our community. We also focus on education and training, organization development, human behavior, and more importantly, many of our members are focused on social economics, impact of engineering technology management. Our focus area is 5 areas that we usually talk to between ourselves. We try to help our members to take their ideas that they have to the market. We identify in the large corporations